for papers. And in a nutshell, is like looking at the effectiveness of jail time. And what I want to do, first of all, is to say up front that Dr. Lucille Baird, she barely has a voice, and she's been really going, almost burnt out. So she'll be making a contribution tonight, but it might not be in the fullness of the contribution that she really wants to make. So just want to make that clear. Also, our Chief Magistrate, he will be slightly late. He'll be here about 7 o'clock-ish also. And I believe we have everybody else here with respect to the panel. I also want to welcome members of the media also to our panel discussion. So first of all, we have to start in the right way, and we will start with prayer. And we will ask our senior pastor, Reverend Quincy Jones, to do that for us.
Good night, everyone. I trust that you're hearing me quite clearly.
Yes, we are.
Thank you all. Thank you, panelists, for joining us. Thank you, Brother Emmanuel, for putting this together. Let's pray. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for your goodness to us and for the privilege we have of coming together in this medium. This is an important topic, and we are eternally grateful that you are able to allow these eminent persons on the panel to be able to lend some discussion and guidance to us as we reflect on this very important aspect of our lives, and basically how we as a society respond to those who have fallen afoul of the law. We thank you that as a church, as a community, that you've helped us to extend some measure of grace, but more of that is needed as we strive to build our people up after they've fallen. And so as we go through this time together, I pray that the information that is gleaned here will give us, not only as a church, but as a society, better tools with which we can respond to the unfortunate and sometimes willful situations of other people, that we would respond to bring healing to their lives, not just for those who commit the quote unquote crimes, but to those who are affected by the actions of the people. Bless us as we go through tonight. Continue to strengthen each panelist and each of us as we listen attentively and as we contribute to this discussion. We thank you for your mercies towards us. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you so much. Amen. And let's get down to it. We have 2 hours, so we don't want to be here after 8:30. So what I want to suggest up front is that the persons who are asking questions, to keep your questions concise. And if you're making a comment, please make your comments also concise. And the panelists would have a little more flexibility, but there too would I would expect them to consider the time, because I want as many people as possible to interact. And of course, if you want to ask a question, you use the raise hand icon, or you can put your questions in the chat. So the subject, as we all know by now, is jail time working out for the betterment of lawbreakers. And I want to say that some of the areas we want to look at, or the main areas we want to look at tonight, not limited to these areas, but we want to cover these areas tonight. That is the victim impact. We talk a lot about the perpetrators, and we tend to forget the victims in the same light. Factors contributing to the lengthy remand times and possible solutions, perceived or real inconsistencies in sentencing and possible solutions, rehabilitation for suspects on remand, the pros and cons of concurrent and consecutive sentencing, fines versus incarceration and other forms of sentencing, their effectiveness and appropriateness in relation to the offense, the role of the church, home, corporate Barbados, and the police in helping to reintegrate ex-prisoners into mainstream society, especially with the jailbird stigma hanging over their heads, and the pros and cons of pre-sentencing reports and character witnesses. At the end of tonight, we want to come up with some solutions. So First of all, I want to ask each panelist to have the opening shots with respect to where we go from here and the areas that we mentioned. You can kind of summarize it in 2 minutes. And we'll start with the ladies. Kim, what I failed to do though, let me do that right now. The panelists tonight are the Chief Magistrate Ian Weeks, former prison inmate Mark Headley, criminologist and senior researcher in the Criminal Justice and Research Unit of the Attorney General's Office, Kim Ramsay, head of the Inmate Rehabilitation at Dodds Prison, Anthony Holder, and criminal investigator, acting police inspector, Peter Dawson. And of course, as I said earlier, we should hear also from Dr. Lucille Baird. So Kim, could you open up the baton tonight?
Good night, everyone. I do not know, Mr. Joseph, what new information you want me to add from the last time we spoke, other than to say that, you know, we continue to grapple with not only crime, but reintegration of persons from prison into society. And it is not just about prison, but it is the gap between prison and the community. And this is something that we probably should discuss tonight, which I did not hear on your list of things to discuss, which is
limited.
well, that's true, but we have to look at, as I said last time, the whole issue of through care and how we incorporate the ex-con back into, or reintegrate the ex-con convict back into society with all the challenges that they face in prison. And more importantly, we have to address the whole issue of victims and the impact of crime on victims, which is sadly lacking, not only here, but in many jurisdictions across the world. So those are things that I believe that we can address.
Mr. Holder?
Yes, good night to all the panelists. Thank you all for letting us be at this very important panel. And tonight discussions continue from part one. I'd like to talk about the efforts that are done in the prison. I hope that we have a whole criminal justice agency approach to dealing with crime, including the convicted, the remand, and also the victims. That's not left with the victims, as Ms. Ramsay stated correctly. And we need to have all information on all departments collated together to act as one unit to fight this social and health problem. It's not only a criminal problem, it's a health and social problem. There must be a holistic approach to tackle this crime and this scourge is impacting all society. So we must work together to come up with practical and operational solutions, not only administrative, because we can talk pretty here, but if there's no operational of it, we're going to fail. Everything we do here must be operationalized. Who to do what, when to do what, to make things efficient and effective. Thank you.
Thank you. Inspector Dawson, your opening shots.
Hey, good evening to everyone. They're not opening shots, they're just remarks. Thank you again for having me on the panel. And I would want to say that having reviewed the last time that we met, I just wanted to reiterate that the Barbados Police Service is here to serve, protect, and to reassure all persons. This would also include persons who have been formerly incarcerated. And also I would like to reiterate as well that the police officers are members of the society, and whatever can come of good for the society will also come of good for them. And that I am sure that police officers we are asked will want to help support the improvement of this situation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Mark Headley. Mark? Yeah.
Hey, sorry about that.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Right. I just want to say thanks again for inviting me to this panel discussion. It's very important discussion, I should say. And I believe that for things to really work, like everyone before me said, we must all come together for the better and put our feelings one side about how we feel about the ex-inmate, the ex-convict, and that sort of stuff. But more seriously, I believe, like Ms. Ramsay said, we also must pay greater attention to the victims of the crimes, because that is a serious thing as far as I'm concerned. And I believe that if we are supposed to get things on the right path, then, and we put things together, we will see a greater change and a greater impact for the better on society as a whole and throughout a wider prison inmate population.
Thank you so much. So the others are not here yet. So what we want to do is now dig into this issue of the victim, the impact on the victim. And I want you to really give some serious thought to how we can better cater to the victims and as much as compensation, not necessarily financial compensation, but how we can address them emotional compensation, emotionally and psychologically, and in their whole well-being, and how they can deal with the trauma of being victimized as a result of crime. Let's start. Mark, let me start with you, because you, so to speak, walk the walk. And I want to find out from you, I want to put you on the spot. As a result of your conviction, and after you've been released and all that, did you have any intention, or did you had a feeling to say, meet up with the victim to kind of, you know, address and say sorry or whatever? How did you deal with that?
Well, if I am to be honest, I actually, that's a yes or no question. Yes, I wanted to meet up with him or with at least one member of the family, none in particular, to express certain feelings or certain, you know, the whole way I felt about the matter, and to really say what I wanted to say in person. Because even though you are offered that opportunity with the victim impact statement, I believe that something seems or comes over more genuine when it's said face to face. But on the other end of that scope, no, I didn't want to, because then you don't know, because the opportunity was never offered early up, you don't know how the person or persons are going to react when they see you approach them or when they see you in the neighborhood. So yes, I wanted to, and I still would like to, but like I said, it's a very ticklish situation because you don't know how to go about it. So that's why I said from the start, I believe that if things are put in place during the sentencing, so you can actually say what you have to say directly, then you as the individual charged for the offense will be able to better feel or gauge the person or person's reaction for future reference, for lack of a better statement.
Would you say that you've gotten closure?
I personally have gotten closure on the matter based on how I feel and based on the route that I took, based on the actions that I knew transpired. But closure in general, I believe, comes from having either the acceptance or to hear again how the other person feels towards you, and to actually hear their input on the whole thing. So to say that I have 100% closure, I would have to say no, because forgiveness is closure. Asking God for forgiveness is having closure, but not knowing how persons feel towards you, even though people say it doesn't matter or it shouldn't matter. In these sort of situations, it really matters, because you are charged for a serious crime, a crime that you can't reverse. So closure for me comes with saying what you have to say, whether or not it is accepted the way you would like it to be accepted, but at least you would have gotten it off of your chest. And then I believe that's where full closure comes as a person in this position.
Thank you so much. That was really very instructive, coming from one who walked the walk. So I want to make a relevant transition, therefore, to Mr. Holder, since you are in prison, you're the rehab and head of the rehab, and therefore, how do you link what Mark is saying in terms of putting things in place to ensure that there's some sort of closure, there's some opportunity offered for ex-inmates to, say, so to speak, express their feelings about the situation? Holder.
Yes, sir. Victims impact is an aspect or part of our rehabilitation program, our reintegration program. In the cycle stage of change, it must come to grips with what they've done, how what they've done impact the victim, how it caused the equilibrium in society as well. So there must be so they can come to a catharsis of what they have done. And therefore, we cannot go outside to meet the victim, but we let them go through programs in prison that they will be able to address the effects that they did, how it impact the victim, how it impact them, and how it impact society, so they're able to move forward. In terms of victim impact also, for some victims, there will never be a catharsis. There'll always be this anger, there'll always be this introspection of vexation. But the person must come to a state in their mind that they feel that what they've done is wrong, and they come to accept it and be able to move on, able to cope, able to deal with any frustration that may come to their side. As the victim or the victim family or friends see them, how they're able to deal with it. So we are not lying to the image of saying that the pressure will ease off. We are trying to increase their coping mechanism to deal with any pressure that may happen to them on the outside. We may have victims that may accept them, but any victim got grandchildren, grandparents. We had an inmate who was getting released, and even his own family, the grandparents and the older person in the family won't accept him. But the younger siblings in the family didn't want to accept what he did, even his own family. And it took the lower, we had to bring them together to all regular officers had to go and speak with them and let them know how to get to a resolution. So we'll be angry, being angry about an incident may cause you to react angry over other incidences. So therefore, we try to do it in our psychology program to accept what you've done, if you don't accept what you've done, to move forward, you will all be fighting with issues and challenges. You all fear somebody stalk your name. You all fear that somebody's talking about you talk about what you did. So you must come to get to what you did and realize what you did impact people. So you want to do this action again. So victim impact is very important and very crucial, and it's also a key part in our litigation flow. It's very, very key. But it's only happened to our convicted inmates, because the remand inmates haven't been convicted as yet. Therefore, we do victim impact education, not programs. Okay?
Okay. So, Kim, outside of the prison, do you see we need to set up a permanent system or mechanism whereby victims can get, so to speak, some consolation at least as a result of being victimized? Your mood.
I want to answer your question within a more broader perspective. I am one of the persons out there that's very passionate about victims and the fact that they're more on the periphery as it relates to sentencing. I always tell people, especially my students, that victims are often the forgotten players in the criminal justice system. If we look at sentencing, if we look at any particular sentence, we hear about the discounts that are given to offenders for time served. For time on remand, we give them discounts for guilty pleas. And it always seems that everything is stacked against the victim and for the perpetrator. And I believe that the victim's voice becomes more distant in the whole process. And let me start from the beginning. In our criminal justice system, we have legal aid for offenders. But what is there for victims? Where can victims and victims' families go to for aid? When you lose the breadwinner in the family, when the person, when whoever, a loved one who's taking care of the house financially, there is no recourse. So that's the financial side of it. Then there's the psychological side, there's the social side. There are people who are victimized, and usually after the funeral, people tend to forget about them. But people continue to suffer for years and years after their victimization. But what about them? Nobody's there for them. We need to play a more integral role in the lives of these victims. That's two. Then there's the sentencing. Yes, we're now having victim impact statements. This was something that did not always happen. You know, because I know overseas, for instance, the victim is allowed to speak directly to the offender and let the offender know. I mean, we know of Scott Peterson's case. He just was resentenced last year. This is in the last week, sorry, this is in the US. And even though he was sentenced to death, Lacey Peterson's family was still allowed to speak to him all these years later and tell him how they felt about what he's done to their loved ones. I think that helps the healing. It helps the victims' families, and I think that's something that we should consider. We do not have victim compensation. So there is, as I said before, there's no recourse for victims who have been maimed, who have lost personal items, who have lost limb, who have, I mean, we can run the whole gamut. Funeral expenses, none of these things are available to victims. And I believe, and I've been saying this for years, that we need to really put victims at the core of sentencing. And one more thing, things like when the offenders coming out of prison. I think I would have mentioned this the last time we spoke, where I know somebody who was whose mother was murdered, and she did not know that the person's got bail. And she said she just happened to turn a corner and she was face to face with one of the perpetrators. Can you imagine the psychological harm that this can do to her? And she said it's almost like, you know, nobody consulted with her and to ask her how she feels about this person coming out on bail. And she said, suppose this person wanted to attack me. I was there literally through an alley and I butted with this person. So these are all things that we have to consider. I mean, I could go on all night, but I won't. I'm looking at things like secondary victimization, which is where the victim now is victimized all over again by the criminal justice system. This is an actual criminological term where victims, they feel like, you know, that they're going through the victimization process all over again. Let me just give one quick example. A person who's been, I'm not going to use homicide now. Let's say that your house was broken into, your car was broken into, you were raped, whatever. And treatment by persons in the criminal justice system, I'm not going to speak to any particular person, but people talk about, you know, the attitude of persons within the system and how they speak to them, how they treat them. I think we need to be a little more humane when we, meaning persons in the criminal justice system, when we are working with and dealing with persons who are victims of crime. You have to understand that people's emotions are raw. I think people need, I think some police, for instance, probably need a little more counseling and how to work with, you know, the whole victim support unit probably needs to do some more training with police and so on. But understand that you are victimized, you're not rational. Some people, you know, you're emotional. And yes, the police have a job to do. Yes, defense lawyers, etc. But we have to understand that this person did not ask to be victimized. And we have to be more understanding. I know that a lot of training is going on in terms of that, but there's still a lot more work to be done. So there's a whole set of things, witness protection, witness protection, etc. We don't have that available in Barbados because naturally Barbados is a small country. But victims, I believe that we can do a lot more for victims because it always seems skewed towards the offender. So that's just my 2 cents.
So Acting Inspector Dawson, I'm going to put you on the spot because I know Kim didn't identify the crime. Yes, Reverend Quincy, will come to you shortly. I know Kim didn't identify the crime, but we know, for example, in respect to domestic abuse of women. We've heard women from time to time saying when they go to the police station and they report it, they ought to made jokes of the police. They become the brunt of jokes from police officers, some police officers. And some might say maybe she wanted it or things like that. The other thing is that I want you to address too is that some police officers, I'm told, will say, well, I mean, this woman get beaten today and she gone back with the man, she keep going back with the man and keep reporting the thing all the time. So, they become like fed up. So I want to address this aspect of the victimization of women in respect of domestic violence and their relationship with the police.
Okay, good evening. Thanks for that opportunity to address it. And what I would say, first of all, is that there are many occasions when things do happen, and police officers are trained. With the many years of service that I have had, I can tell you that there are many occasions where the right thing is done. That's important. The right thing is done on many occasions. Yes, sometimes the wrong thing is done. And I can assure you that it isn't taken as flippant. If someone does it wrong, they're counseled, the police themselves are counseled about it, because we, as the member started by saying that we are members of the community, our brothers and our sisters, they're the victims, and they're also at times the perpetrators. So it's not a we versus them situation. And I would just like to skirt and say that, do you know that we talk about our criminal justice system, but the truth is we need to concentrate on restorative criminal justice, where we look at the restoration not only from the perpetrator, but the victims as well, and the entire society. It's not a we versus them. We are a society, we are one society, and we have to work towards working together with all the systems. It's easy sometimes to poke at a particular area, but the truth is it's an entire social problem that we have here in Barbados, and we have to put all the systems together to improve it. In relation to we have a family conflict unit, and that unit works extremely hard in doing all it can as it relates to family conflicts and domestic violence. Many of our officers are trained regularly as it relates to domestic violence. As a matter of fact, we know that the Domestic Violence Act right now for Barbados is one of the best acts that we have. It takes into consideration all types of persons. I won't go into which types of persons, but it takes into consideration all types of persons. So I can say that, yes, clearly we have, yes, their issues sometimes do develop, but it's not a case where the Royal Barbados, the Barbados Police Service is supporting things that are not of the best thing to do. I hope that helps to answer your question.
Yeah, I'm sure I see something in Kim's eyes, boy, but I can get back to you now soon. Reverend Quincy has a question or comment?
Yes, good night again. Two things. One, I believe that Magistrate Weeks has joined us.
Okay, thanks.
So thank you. But secondly, this is posing to both Kim and Mark, because the two of them address the similar issue. And the question that I have is the high rate of reoccurrence within people who fall afoul of the law, could that be attributed to the lack of an understanding of how their actions are affecting people? Meaning that because we don't have in a society where the offenders could interact with those that they have hurt, is that the reason why people are committing perhaps the same crimes over and over again? Because there's a disconnect between their actions and how it really plays out in families and other people's lives? That's for Kim.
Okay, so the research is showing us that it is important sometimes to for offenders to understand how the crime that they have committed impacts on the victim, and they believe that it helps with the healing process. It gives the offender accountability, and it helps the victim. It gives it brings a bridge, and as I said, healing, restorative justice, as they say in the parlance, for the two parties. That works in some crimes. It does not work in other crimes because and obviously it's culturally specific, because I'm speaking off the cuff, but I don't see many homicide family members that will want to have that direct link or relationship or meeting with an offender that took their loved one's lives. I mean, it does happen. It can happen. There are some families that have to become Christians and they have forgiven the person. And I believe that but I do believe that it offers accountability and it does help. What I do not agree with is that it is a contributing factor to high recidivism, because the research shows us that there are specific variables that are contributing to high levels of recidivism. For instance, persons who do not have any ties to communities, who are unemployed, drug offenders, persons who go back to the same communities that cause them to that are linked to their recidivism, to their offending, lack of education, poor social skills, homelessness, and substance abuse, mental illness, an unforgiving society, not being able to reintegrate because of the ex-con status. There's so many factors that are strong contributors to recidivism. Age, youth, and the type of crime they commit, because people who commit, especially property crimes, like burglars and so on, thefts, simple theft, etc. Those people tend to be on drugs, and as I said, substance abuse is a strong factor in recidivism. I must say though, to answer your question, I've seen a shift in tide, because I remember like in 2004 when I looked at recidivism in the prison, what I found back then was that people who committed murder were least likely to recidivate. What I've seen now is that there's a shift in that. And I believe it is because the type of person who committed crimes back then, we had what we refer to as the old jailers, who have been in prison 30, 20 years, who basically have served their time, they're changed persons, they're not caught up in that life of crime anymore. And they just want to come home and make a contribution to society. They picked up a skill while they were in prison, etc. I mean, there's a whole set of them who are back in prison now who've never committed a crime again. But the kind of person we have now, the gunman, because there's a large portion of the prison population who are in prison for gun-related crimes and homicides, and they're younger, and they're not connected that way to society. It's about shooting. It's about turning the prison into institutionalized ghetto, and they see society a little different. Their purpose for committing crimes is a little different to the criminal of the 80s and 90s. So things have shifted. And I'm seeing a slight increase in terms of the type of offender who commits more serious crimes and who's going back to prison. We still have the drug offender and so on, but we're seeing a small increase. But obviously we have to do the proper research to unearth these things and the factors that contribute into it. But there has been a shift. So in summary, the drivers of recidivism are more likely to be what I outlined to you, as opposed to the link between the victim and the offender and the accountability. But it does help in terms of bringing closure and helping the healing process.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we have a question in the chat. Is professional counseling and rehabilitation mandatory for all prisoners at Dodds? Mr. Holder?
Yes, sir. Before you ask that question, go, because I don't know what Raji stated, though the victim, in part, it does play a role in recidivism, in the sense that you look at the Criminologist study in 1985 for the National Task Force on Crime, which he realized that persons who suffer antisocial disorders, personality disorders, have a flat effect, or according to Lucille and Baird theory of Hedian's calculus, we can calculate the need for pleasure over pain. And if they don't realize, and we do role playing in prison with the victim in part, and we do role playing, and let them play the role of the victim, then they only really understand what they do to people, if you understand what I'm saying. So most of the person who is severe or have antisocial disorders do not care about, they don't have this feelings towards person or what crime they do. They care about pleasuring themselves. Hence they commit the crime over and over again. So in prison and the victim impact program, we try to let them realize what they've done and put it to play the role of the offender or the victim to see how it impact them. Now, in terms of remand inmates, mandatory to doing rehabilitation programs according to prison rules, inmates that come to prison all must go through rehabilitation. All Mr. say all offenders who are sent to prison are kept in safe custody by the prison and must be rehabilitated. All prisoners. So what we do, we assess all prisoners who come to prison in our induction unit, whether they are convicted or remand. And when we find that certain inmates in the remand first. So the convicted inmates become a court and go through programs. But the remand inmates, we found when they have certain criminogenic needs or things that cause them to commit prison, we put it in programs to suit to these criminal factors. The issue is that you do not have enough psychologists or programmers to give them this treatment. However, each inmate go through a basic program, educational, spiritual, and English and maths and such like. Therefore, all inmates go through rehabilitation programs or custodial plans. All inmates go through the same. Is the extent at which they go through it.
Okay, thank you. So, Chief Magistrate Weeks, are you hearing us? You with us? So we want to bring you in. I don't know how much you have heard with respect to the victim impact, because we want to focus at this point in time on the victims. We wanted to look at what can be put in place. Is there anything in place to help the victims, and what can be done to help the victims in a bigger sense, and in as much as focus is put on the offender, and like Kim was outlining some of the things that the offender benefits from, all these different discounts, because that's one of the things on my list of areas, and I find this very intriguing, all these discounts that the offenders get. So Magistrate Weeks, could you address this issue of the victims and your thoughts on what can be done?
Well, let me just say good night to all. Sorry for my lateness. It was as a result of having to do one or two things at this time of the year, not because of the festivities, but the festivities will usually get in the way of those of us who have other legitimate things to do. So let me apologize. I am not so sure if I'm the right person to be addressing the issue on victims. For the simple reason that from our perspective as judicial officers, it is only on a determination of guilt or someone pleading guilty do you get that terminology victim coming out. The police will use the term victim. People like Kim will use the term victim, but as I said, until I hear the evidence and I make a determination, that is the only way you will hear about a victim. And that is how the system is balanced. And I suppose that is where you have a little challenge, because you've been hearing about the discounts and so on. But restorative justice has been one of those concepts, and I'm sure Kim would refer to it on more than one occasion, where there's an attempt to address the issues concerning victims. Throughout the years, there have been many discussions concerning whether there should be a victim compensation fund. I believe that that is a useful idea and a concept, and I believe that the powers that be, that is why I'm saying a number of these things are policy, which will be outside my remit. So I have to be careful how I tread on these things. But I can say to you a victim compensation fund can be looked at. I believe that the resources from such may be taken from some schemes where we do forfeiture of funds depending on the nature of the crime. That is an angle that can be looked at. If you forfeit some monies from some illegal activity, it could then be used for certain types of victim compensation schemes. Apart from that, the restorative justice, which could see persons addressing directly the persons that they may have impacted. I agree with Kim again that the nature of the types of crimes have changed. And because of the nature of those crimes, that may be harder to implement. But where you have a case of serious bodily harm, and you do have that victim compensation fund, you can find a way to ensure that a person who is so impacted can continue with their life, can continue to support their family. But I know that throughout the years, that idea has been toyed with by quite a few as to whether it may be looked at again. I think it is a consideration, but that for now would all be, for now, I think that would be enough given my role, not delving too much into policy. Others can delve into it, but it's a dangerous area to go in my case.
Right. Thank you so much. So I want to dovetail into this question, and this is open. Do you find that the victims, the eventual victims, in your case, sir, the eventual victims, complain or protest that this sentence really is a slap on the wrist in comparison to what happened to my son, what my son had to endure, yeah? That might be also compounding the trauma of the victim also. Could someone or ones comment on that, please? You want to go?
I think they're waiting for me to jump in on that.
Yeah, jump in.
Yes, I think you have in a number of cases, families and persons who are victims, they have an issue sometimes with the sentences. And I think it is a lot to do with the perception. I think forums such as this will help people to understand how we reach where we reach. For instance, I think there is this big perception that magistrates can sentence people to life. We cannot. We are creatures of statute, very often limited generally by what the Magistrate Court Act may prescribe. And when it comes to drug matters and other pieces of specific legislation, they will indicate to us how far we can go. So when it comes to anything that persons would wish to be more harsh, that may be something that they would have to discuss with Parliament. But because we are creatures of statute, we are constrained. And let me explain, give you an example. Sometimes the public may cry out when they hear that you get 18 months for burglary. But the public does not recall, for instance, that the person may be a first timer, or the person may be a person with a drug problem. All of these are factors that must be taken into consideration before you give a sentence. There are aggravating and mitigating factors. There may be factors which suggest that that person would have cooperated extensively with the police as a drug person. They would have gone and they would have shown the police where they entered, what they took, what they did with the items and so on. All of these are factors that the court must look at. There are sometimes aggravating features, and the court will look at those features to determine a harsher sentence. But at the end of the day, we still must recognize It depends on the court. The High Court has far greater powers, but the High Court is still guided by laws as well, and a lot of common law decisions. So you will see the CCJ make a ruling on a point. You have to be guided by that. Our Court of Appeal may set guidelines. You have to be guided by that. So where the public feels aggrieved, I think the public should in fact deal with the lawmakers, which is Parliament, to indicate their suggestions as it relates to what possible other sentences, and they can do comparisons because they know that our public, they read well, and they go on all these sites and get all this information. So maybe it is time for the public then to make some suggestions to the lawmakers, because remember, our job is to interpret the law. We can't just come up with what we feel like. And on those small points, I will then hear some other discussion.
Kim, I see something in your eyes, Kim. So I know you want to jump
I am
in.
not sure what you're saying in my eyes, Mr. Joseph. I'm listening with interest. As somebody who works in the system, I understand very much what Magistrate is saying. And I do know that there are, I like to hear his terminology, creatures of statute. But I do understand that there is a balance, a delicate balance, and it can be even a controversial balance. Because at the end of the day, well, the judiciary, have to consider aggravating and mitigating circumstances, and they have to follow the guidelines. We talk about justice, and we have, the symbol of justice, which is the blindfolds, because justice is supposed to be blind. The reality is, though, Mr. Joseph and others, that the public does not perceive it like that. They believe it is skewed. They believe it is skewed towards accused persons, and they believe it is skewed towards those who are of better financial standing in society. And our founding fathers from years ago, centuries ago, talked about the justice system, and for it to be effective, it must be swift, which is what my friend Pamela Haynes is here asking about why it takes so long. It must be swift, it must be certain, it must be consistent. That is something that I think that is up for discussion. I'm not the moderator, but I believe that these are things, that have to be discussed. Yes, we know that that cases are taking a long time in the system, and the Attorney General has brought on more judges and so on to work with it. But at the end of the day, a lot of victims feel flustered and frustrated that cases take 5, 10, 15 years to come through the system. Some people lose interest, do not want to, drag on, and they want to get on with their lives. And unfortunately, that can lead to attrition in cases where people believe that, I'm no longer willing to, I cannot take time off from work. I cannot keep facing the accused all the time. I just want to get on with my life. And we end up with a lot of, in some cases, a lot of discontinued cases and so on. There's so many other factors, but as I said, there's a delicate balance. There's a balance of the accused and his rights, but there's also the balance of the victim and their rights. And when I say victim, I'm talking about in homicide cases, the person who's no longer with us, and then those who are left behind, who are the secondary victims.
Yeah, that was on my list, Kim. I want this discussion to follow a logical sequence. I don't want to jump from question and be disjointed, right? So, so we can move smoothly, since you've kind of referred to Pamela Haynes's query, because move smoothly into the issue of sentencing and people being on remand for so long, and then they are sentenced to time served, and that is a problem of the system. This is something that needs to be addressed seriously, because there was a case where it was discovered by a prison officer, and Mr. Holder can attest to this, that the language used that this guy was lost away or forgotten or abandoned. They don't remember that he was there and he was supposed to be in court, and he was just there for years and years and years, and it was discovered was atrocious. So I want some solutions. I want you to address, Mr. Chief Magistrate, from your perspective, what are some of the solutions that we can put into place to help with reducing the time on remand and the time that it takes for people to actually go before the court and their cases start to be tried? I mean, we've gotten some licks from the CCJ all the time. Every time there's a case, the CCJ rules on a case, we get bare licks for the time that it takes for us to bring cases before the court.
Great. All right, great question. Again, throws me in a kind of middle of the road situation again between policy and what happens. Let me just indicate that what I've been suggesting for a very long time. If I start, as the old people say at the beginning, I think that one solution would be to give the Barbados Police Service more technology. And I've suggested this for a very long time. And by this, I mean that when police officers go to any allegation, it may be an accident between two vehicles to the highest end of a capital crime. If they have the technology in their hands, that technology can be used to send the information straight back to the station. Because part of the police problem is they do not have enough manpower. I have a solution for that too, but that may be for another discussion. But because they don't have the manpower, they need the technology so that they can create a statement straight away with a tablet, for instance. That same tablet can be used to take photographs. Now, they are not eliminating the scenes of crime photographer, but this is used to help them with their statements. It is sent back straight to the station, and statements are generated instantaneously. You will just go in and you will just double check, statements are ready. Large part of the process is statements, because you may charge someone and then you still have to provide the pre-trial disclosure, which is information for the attorneys or the accused, him or herself, so that they can know what is the nature of the case. So long as that technology is used, you get your statements, in my view, within 90 days. Now, it was discussed many years ago. What you are having now is physical paper. This is not my idea, but this was discussed some years ago when we had one of our retreats, and it was discussed with the bar. We can create a secure platform where the lawyers can receive their information. I have to be vague like this now because there are certain security issues I can't get into. But if we create certain secure platforms for the attorneys to receive the information, they can get that, the police can get their information together, the attorneys and the court can receive all of that information, in my view, within 90 days. If that information is provided in 90 days, it means then who wants to plead guilty can plead guilty, who wants to go to trial, and we can set trials. I believe technology is a major part of it. Secondly, I've said it already as well, while the high courts may have some level of technology in terms of getting the information out in transcription, we at the magisterial level are still doing longhand. And I believe across the board, if we can improve a system which can give us that information without the longhand, I believe that we can also expedite any type of matter that we have before us. So technology is the key. What a lot of people don't understand, and the myth is floating around, they do not understand how much training we get as judicial officers consistently in relation to all the changes happening all over the place. So we are trained consistently looking at all of these issues. So I believe that those issues can be addressed, and if we address those issues from that perspective, we'll move. Now, I wish to just deal with the issue of remand, because Kim would have alluded to it, and I did as well. If you have persons who are committing offenses such as burglary, they may reach a point where they may be sentenced and they may return to society, and then they may end up with some other burglary charges or similar types of offenses. You may end up keeping them for a period of time because we are not ready to proceed because of the other issues I just mentioned that we can correct. So the broad answer to it would be an improvement in technology. And what I can say to members of the public as well, you can't lay a complaint and then you can't be found. And I have to differ with Kim. We're no longer calling complainants, as I would call them, to the court every time a court case is heard. The complainant is warned when the matter is ready for trial. So a number of these things have occurred. You're not just calling a complainant every time the matter is called. That is not taken away from the fact, of course, that we want it in a shorter time. And I must dispel this myth generally across the board too. Because the CCJ has criticized Barbados, do not be fooled that Barbados is any unique space for delay of trials. This is a worldwide phenomenon. It is not good. And each jurisdiction will have to find ways to deal with it. But this idea that Barbados is the only place where there's this backlog and all that, that myth needs to go. And the persons who read should know that. So I'll just give those initial comments, get some feedback, but technology is key. More personnel I would ask for, of course, more personnel at our level. I believe now that there's specialization in the High Court that will do wonders, because with specialization of the judiciary, you will get some lawyers who will come and argue some fluff points, as we call them. When you're a specialist, fluff points will not hold up the court. We dismiss them. Move on, counsel. I've dealt with that. So specialization in judicial personnel, which is started now, that will see a lot of improvement in terms of how we go forward. So I'll break here.
Yeah, very good. Thank you so much. So I want a response quickly because they have some questions in the chat and some quick responses from the gentleman, Acting Inspector Dawson. You are part of that whole process in the judicial process. Could you comment on, take up from where the Chief Magistrate left off?
Just to say that he has represented the point and the problems fairly accurately. And also to say that I can't say what's coming, but I know technology is coming. But I can't announce it here.
Okay. Do you have a solution to the delay? Because the police have been accused of being part of the delay.
I won't let you draw me out into anything. I've given what I have to say. But what I will ask though, because I realize we're not touching on the church, and we're not touching on why are we here. I haven't heard anything about the impact of the church on the whole situation. I would love to hear it. And also to hear if the church is impacting our youth at this point in time. Thank you.
Mr. Dawson, we can't get everything we want to, you know, we got a list. We got to take it step by step. So I want to hear from Mr. Holder quickly. Do you have an answer to the delays?
Right, I concur with Marshall Weeks in which that technology is very key. There is a delay, which is a worldwide problem. There should be a digitalization of the system now, which that all the criminal justice players work on the same platform. As you say, we'll get into the nitty-gritty of it because security reasons. But anytime a case is delayed, it's because it's a paper trail issue with investigations, prosecutions, and then you got the impact yet further verbal of lawyers need to be streamlined. Because we can't have 50 inmates going to a case with 50 jurisdiction and the same lawyer represent them. He can't be in 50 places at one time. Hence, the case will have to be adjourned. So the lawyers need to be streamlined. There needs to be a digitalization or technology to improve the efficiency of the cases. And as I say, streamline lawyers, there needs to be a criminal justice system database with different level clearances that was feeding the cases that funds won't go, I won't say missing, but I said it, but funds won't go, won't be delayed to go to the prosecutor to move forward. Hence, there will be a delay in most of the cases. Another issue, as I said before, I said again, is lawyers need to be streamlined. You know, I like what you were saying, a certain amount of clients at each jurisdiction at any time. So therefore, if you got, they go to court and get returned back to the prison because the kids get delayed, is impact of financial costs. So if you get this problem speed up, it will help the prison also help the whole criminal justice system. So even being in prison, $95 a day for remand, because there's a delay, it impacted us. So we need a solution. We need to kind of get a solution. And I agree with Magistrate Weeks. It needs to be an improvement of the efficiency. There needs to be digitalization. There needs to be improvement in technology. There needs to be more communication. There needs to be lawyer streamlining. I could go on.
Thank you so much. So how do we explain delays, people on remand for 10 and 15 years? With all that has been said, how do you explain that?
Well, most of the time, if the inmate on delay, what happened in the past is most of the lawyers don't have no representative. Hence, we have legal aid, but there should be, might want to say that there should be a public defendant who will be hearing these cases, that person who has no QC representative or no representative has a person that corner looking after the case. And that will be the issue. So if you get committee of service signed down and there's no bail for him, or he not afforded bail, he gets in jail signed down, which is indefinitely. Therefore, there needs to be a public representative who could, they have a public prosecutor, there needs to be a public defendant who will fight on behalf of those on remand who cannot be able to pay a representative, if you know what I'm saying.
All right, thanks.
If we may jump in.
Yeah, please do.
I believe that One Queen's Counsel, Mr. Michael Ashley QC, he believes in a duty council, and that a duty council should, legally should be expanded, and that's what he argues, so that there's a duty council to go and visit people from the police stage, and that could assist with it. Yes, he's also arguing for public defender. What I was saying now in terms of the attorneys is that most courts are well coordinated in terms of attorneys. The problem is there are few attorneys who are at a certain level doing criminal law. The former Chief Justice, Marston Gibson, has always called for it. So David Simmons, I believe, has always called for it. But the criminal law is not an area that would attract too many persons. And if you get more attorneys working at a certain level, because certain attorneys may do the magisterial level in terms of certain things, but when it comes to the high court and your life is in danger, your grandmother's not going to hire a lawyer 2 years out. So as much as we want the young lawyers to be in, they will call for certain lawyers. But in a managed system, and there's a lot of case management going on now in terms of criminal matters. So therefore, the judge or the magistrate will get the lawyer, see what is happening for the next month to determine where your matter will be fixed. So you're having a lot of that. But as I said, if you have 6 top criminal lawyers, you're still going to have a problem at the end of the day.
So let me go to the chat because the questions are building up. Makeda says, what if the victim, this has to do with the victim, going back to the victim. What if the victim was in an altercation where they started it, that is, started the altercation, but ended up being the unlucky one? Should compensation be given to them or their families? Who want to jump in there?
I can say that that is not a determination. You don't, let us remember, if you are charged at the High Court, and at the end of the day, the jury did not believe the questioners put, they are free to come to whatever determination that they may wish to come to. The jury may very well find, no, I've heard the evidence and I disagree that the VC was the instigator. At the end of the day, if they believe the evidence and they come to a particular verdict, the system would be designed in such a way that compensation would go. So the question may be, do we want still to have a jury system? So I just think that a lot of these questions, people gotta remember the first principle. If you believe in the jury system and you leave it in the hands of the jury, and they have found the man guilty even though they have felt, because you remember, the VC may have started and provoked. The law will still look at whether the person who is ultimately found guilty went far beyond the scope of responding. So all of these are questions clearly for the jury. If the jury finds him guilty, the person will be entitled to the compensation depending on the system.
Okay. I want to move quickly because I want to get to concurrent and consecutive. I have a, that bugs me a bit, you know. So the question is that this one was answered about the lawyers, what role they're playing in the delays. 90 days, Pamela Haynes says to you, Chief Magistrate, 90 days is really too long.
For what?
You had suggested about 90 days. What was it?
Yeah, 90 days. Yeah, but I don't think the person who posed the question is being realistic, though. You are looking at 90 days because I understand the system and I understand what is involved. For instance, there's a lot that Inspector Dawson will not talk about for security reasons, and I will skirt certain issues because of security reasons. I can't get a detail. But sometimes you will be charged, but it does not mean that the police will not have other investigations to do. And if they have other investigations to do to provide other things, you will get your initial information and some other information may still follow that. So 90 days, I believe, is a reasonable time. But what the person who asks the question needs to understand, it depends on what you are investigating. If you have a simple assault at the magisterial level, you may not need 90 days. But if you have a capital murder, well, murder, not me say capital murder and being redundant, but if you have a murder, 90 days may not always be adequate, but that is kind of a bar that I set based on the thinking of what has to be done.
Okay.
So you have to really understand the system to know why. And there are persons who are on the defense side who will tell you certain things. They will raise certain issues. And as a result of raising those issues, the prosecution then, because of the same pretrial disclosure, will have to disclose some other things.
So in a nutshell, what is really coming out tonight is that we need public education.
All the time. All the
There's a
time.
lot of things that we perceive and probably out very justifiably so. You're very emotional, you're touched, you're traumatized, whatever, and you see what you see, but you don't see what you're supposed to see.
Right.
So there's the need for more of these fora. So I ask the next question.
Before you ask that question,
okay, go ahead.
What I want to tell the public too, remember, a lot of domestic disputes the police have to attend to. So if a thief is trying to break into your house, the same limited numbers of police officers got to respond. So this is a broad discussion. I can understand why the inspector spoke with the church and so on. If persons will get their families in order, less police time will be spent on matters that they can be dealing with the serious matters.
Okay, so this is another issue of victim. We need to stop sending men to prison for child support. I'm saying men as women are never held accountable when they flout such orders, it makes more sense for the person to work during the day and make their way to serve sentence at night and all weekends. While paying off the arrears, we need to do better as a civilized society. Money spent on incarceration and housing non-violent criminals would be better spent on rehabilitation unless beyond help.
Quick answer, I totally agree. Justice Carlisle Graves, when he was the equivalent of what I'm doing here in Bermuda, a senior magistrate, before he became a judge, he would have reformed their system in Bermuda to a great extent with a similar system where you may work during the week, you may go up on the weekends, or there may be a similar system as the person said. Now, the truth of the matter though is this though, when we have all of these persons who are not committing to orders, does the person who posed the question, does that person understand who is paying for the same children? The same taxpayers. I'm not disagreeing that we can come up with a different system, but the same taxpayers have to pay the medical costs at EQH when the child is delivered. The same taxpayers got to pay the cost when the child is being educated. And if all of the persons, both mothers and fathers, because sometimes mothers have orders against them, and they're not paying the orders, who will end up paying the bills but us?
Okay. Kim, you want to jump in here? I want your phone from your research with respect to this.
So which specific question, Emmanuel?
We were talking about the child support and so on.
Well, I have not, this is not an area that I'm an expert in, so I will just listen.
Okay.
I saw Cammie's question, but I think this is a question more towards the judiciary.
Okay. All right, we have a number of questions here. Someone says, I have to skip some through your moderator. Why in 2021, a person has to waste a whole day in a country of low productivity to answer a summons on maintenance? Would not it be easier when a request for maintenance is made, a summons with the requested amount of custodial parent and an acceptance or contest option be given? A time period for acceptance of order would make more sense in reducing productivity issues.
Oh dear, quick answer again. A number of these questions, I don't think these people understand how the system works. And they seem to be living, in my view, in a very, I don't know, a very affluent kind of world. Who are these people who are applying for maintenance orders at the magisterial level, for instance? In a lot of cases where we don't even know a name sometimes the marshals are all over the place to find persons. These are the challenges we have. So therefore, it sounds very grandiose in my view to have a nice form and all these things. Sometimes we have to find the individuals to bring them to let them account. That is just the reality. Then the court can work with both parties to work out an arrangement which is beneficial to both. Even at the high court level in family, a farm system like that may not always work. It may work for 10% of the persons, but the kind of demographic that we have, I do not anticipate a farm system like that working. And for the whole day at court, no.
All right.
If you are summoned to appear in court, you appear in court. If you get your matter dealt with for the day, your matter is dealt with. It's where people are contentious that you will have to return.
Thank you so much. So I want to get on to the other issue of concurrent and consecutive sentences or sentencing. I've always wondered, a man being charged or being convicted of a string of offenses and all them run concurrently. That means they run together. And sometimes I feel that it should be consecutive. What determines that, Mr. Chief Magistrate?
Well, what determines that depends again on the offense. As I indicated earlier, if you have a man who has a drug problem who is committing burglaries, and he's very cooperative, and in a lot of cases, restitution orders are granted, meaning that some of the property is recovered and therefore you can return the property to the persons. In those circumstances, that will determine whether you give concurrent sentences in some cases or consecutive sentences. His antecedents will also determine that. How well known is this chap? Is he a burglar but not without a drug problem? And he's constantly returning to the system with flimsy excuses. So in a case like that, you may determine that a man will get X sentence, and then you may add on a consecutive 6 months or another consecutive 6 months, depending on the charge, depending on the antecedents of the person, depending on whether the person is a first timer. We are guided again by laws, penal system reform, which says, so is the man a first timer? What should you do? Again, persons may have concerns. Suggest to Parliament any changes they may wish. But again, as creatures of statute, we have to operate in the parameters that we are given. So sometimes, because a man, and let us remember an early guilty plea to 6 burglaries, and you may have already given 18 months, you still have a maximum at the end of the day, you know. And I want the public to understand there's no legislation that I am aware of that gives us the kind of years that the public wants us to give. But yes, at the High Court level, depending on again on the nature of the matter, a judge may determine a concurrent sentence is fitting in these circumstances, depending on again on aggravated and mitigating factors.
Okay. Kim, you want to comment before we get Mr. Dawson and Mr. Holder? Mark?
This is a very sensitive topic, and I have to be very careful because of my job. So I would try very carefully, but I will go back to the same point I made earlier, which is we have to have a balance. And yes, at the expense of repeating myself, I agree that we have to look at statute and so on. We do have the Penal Reform Act. I agree, but I think what is glaringly absent is that balance of victim and offender. And I go back and say that when sentencing happens, you sentence considering okay, this person, the guilty plea, etc., etc. And I know a lot of these things came along with a lot of adjustments to our legislation, a lot of precedents that were set. Romeo Hall versus the Queen, some of those other landmark cases. But again, what about the victim? So you must have. I'm seeing in front of me the hands of justice. You have to have the balance for him, but we also must remember that there are victims who are hurting too. And our claims are becoming more glaring, more blatant. The whole issue of gun violence is troubling. Let's look back at what's happened in the past week or two. The blatant disregard for life. I believe, and Barbadians, when we do our surveys and so on, and we consider what is it that's causing Bajans concern. It is violence, it is crime. I mean, consistently over 3 public opinion surveys, we've had this concern about violence and crime. So when we've reached the stage where we have to, when these things become at the top level of concern among Barbadians, we have to balance the concerns of the public with the rights And then we say rights plural, the rights of the victim and the rights of the offender, because they both have rights. And that is how I see it. So some people may consider some of these sentences, you know, quite unsettling, but I do understand. And my dear friend, Chief Magistrate, I get it, about being a creatures of statute, but I'm just saying that, you know, people forget that we have, yes, their minimum, I know in magistrate court, you can only sentence persons up to, I think, 5 years or something, but at the high court level, I mean, a rapist can still get life in prison. I don't think that's removed from the statute. I think that's still there. I know that there's a CCJ, there are all of those things. And you know, in my 20 years working in the system, I know that people look for loopholes, technicalities, those are things I abhor, but they're reality. And you know, I sit down, I watch the law, I see people talk about, oh, this person get off of this technicality, the judge erred in, you know, he erred in this particular situation and so on. But and at the back of my mind, I'm saying, so this person is going to walk because of legal technicalities. What about the victim? What about the victim? And that's all I want to remind people, that, you know, we get caught up in all the legal jargon and so on, but at the end of the day, a family is suffering and has not received any closure. And I'm speaking, I have a very good friend whose sister was murdered, and her case is unsolved to this day, and that family has no closure, and it is painful on that family. So we have to consider those things when people get into the courts, and some of us, we see it live. We know the impact of these crimes on families that can go on for decades with no closure. We don't hear the stories, Mr. Joseph, of the families who are in counseling for 20 and 30 years because they have not received that closure that is so desperately needed. We don't know about the families who have suffered from non-communicable diseases brought on because of stress. We don't know about the families who sit down and cry every single night because they have not been able to say that last goodbye to their family members. And we can go on and on with the many, many stories. But we hear about the person who, you know, he had a guilty plea, he doesn't have a lawyer, we don't hear the other sides of the serious and long-term impact of victimization, criminal victimization on the remaining family members.
So, Mr. Dawson, I know that you mentioned in the chat, the question is jail time working out for the betterment of lawbreakers? Yes, we have answered that to some extent, but you have a lot of roots, a lot of branches from this whole issue that will come right back home to this, because if it is an offender spends time in jail, the impact of that would be seen outside of jail with respect to recidivism, reoccurrence, going back to the bad habits, now as opposed to being reformed and going back into society and being a useful citizen. So all this has links to delays in people going before the court, delays in trials, and all this kind of thing, all links back, So I want you to address from the police point of view, right? The whole issue, because we're coming down to the home stretch, the whole issue of what role the police would play in helping to reintegrate ex-inmates into society.
Well, I would first say that, and we wanted us to come back to what the topic was. If the jail time was working out for the betterment of the lawbreakers, the reason why he was trying to pull us back there is because, one, well, I've said this in the first thing, it's really not working out, because if jail is set up to rehabilitate a person and we have people going back in all the time, it means it's not really working. But more of the point I wanted us to get to, because this is a Cave Hill Wesleyan Holiness Church forum, so to speak, and I really wanted us to look at the root causes of the problems that we have. And I don't think we've looked at the real root causes. And is it that people are not going to Sunday school? Is it, we talked about the fact that persons are committing crimes and they tend not to care how people used to care before. We now have a society, as we're saying, that offenders do not care. That was said earlier by Kim. And why do they not care? Maybe because they're not going to Sunday school. Maybe because the society is asking them to just think about retribution. Let's just give them 20 years and throw them away. Maybe the society is not looking for forgiveness. Maybe the society is not looking for restoration for all the parties. So I'm saying that if we try to look for restoration for all the parties, we may be able to make some headway. But if we just go along, as some people would say, we'll lick and lock up and leave it, we're not going to get any headway. And we have a lot of so-called first world societies that we could use as examples to see that we are going down the wrong road. I think that's all I would say for now. That's all I would say for now. Thanks.
Can I jump in here, Mr. Joseph?
Go ahead.
I agree with Mr. Dawson. We've explored this topic of root causes of violence and crime ad infinitum. Well, what the root causes are. I think one of the challenges that the resources that we need to implement, a lot of the recommendations are not there. That aside, I always come down to the question of values. Why would a 10-year-old, 15-year-old, 20-year-old decide he's going to pick up a gun and go and stand up by a school and kill somebody because of a request? Knowing that you did it blatantly and you're seen, and why would a man stand up in a mall and shoot somebody in broad daylight? Why, how have we reached this stage? What has gone wrong in our society? My thing is that we are on a downward slide. We are morally bankrupt. Our value systems are gone. It's a free for all. We need to rein it back in. And the question is, how do we do that? Mr. Dawson, I agree, we cannot just do the lockup. I believe there was years ago, I can't remember which city it was in the US, they adopted the weed and seed program simultaneously. You work with weeding out the corrupt elements, the criminal elements, etc., but then you plant seeds of hope. You plant positive behaviors, mentorship programs, or after school programs. You work with persons in at-risk communities. But the problem is we do not have the resources. And along comes COVID, which has further worsened our situation. The resources simply are not there. What we may have to do is have more volunteers, have more persons to, try to get grant funding elsewhere. But the reality is, for these things to be effective, for them to work the way that they should work, we need to have the resources behind them. Without those resources, we're just going to be going around in circles, and while society continues to go down this downward slide. Nothing surprises me anymore when I hear about crime, because we can see it coming. We can see it coming because, as I said, our value systems. Look at the parents. Somebody sent me a voice note yesterday with a mother saying the most ridiculous things to her daughter on the phone, and I'm like, this is where we're at. The thing is to reel it back. How are we going to reel it back? And that's what we can have for discussion. They talked about the church, the role of the church, but it cannot just be the church. My view is that all of the main institutions in society, school, family, church, even our legal system, we all have to come together and try to nip this thing in the bud, because while we're all caught up in COVID and so on, we're still having these issues going on. And these issues the outcome of them can be even worse than COVID, because with crime and lawlessness and all these other things going on, the outcome can be just as devastating, and the long-term impact can be just as deleterious as the COVID situation.
Yes,
Mr. Chair,
thank you so much.
Mr. Chair, I just want to
go ahead.
I just want to I must add, in all fairness, that the Barbados Police Service law, just to say some of the impact that we are trying to have on the situation, And I know some of you know it already, but we have the Juvenile Liaison Scheme. We have the DARE program. We have the Prince Trust program. And now we also have the Family Conflict Unit. So the Barbados Police Service is doing a whole lot to attack this problem, but it is a social problem, and all arms and all persons need to come together to get it done. And my 36 years here in the force tells me that we need to get back to the church.
So, Mr. Dawson, I see Reverend Quincy has his hands up, but I just want to remind you again that this is on my list. The church is on my list. I had it there for a reason, but you have to take it step by step. I had the role of the church, the home, corporate Barbados, the police. You know, I had it all. So since we have broached it now, we will continue with it. We will hear from Reverend Quincy first, and then we will continue on this, because this is kind of, I wanted this lower down so it could encapsulate everything. Okay, so Reverend Quincy.
All right. Good evening, everyone, again. I think tonight we are really missing Reverend Baird because I think she would have a lot more insight into the role of the church so far. And I believe that Mark perhaps could share with us sometime later on how the church helped him in his ability to maneuver through post-prison. But I'm going to say a couple of things. One is that we are living in a society that has turned, I wouldn't say 360, but 180 degrees from a community society to an individual society. We are teaching people to be individuals, but yet still we are expecting them to respond for the benefit of the community. And that is something that we have got to address frontally, whether it's a church, whether it's the police, whether it's the legal system, wherever it is. We are celebrating a lot of individual accomplishments, and we want those accomplishments to redound to the community. But at the basic level, we are not really teaching our people how to function as at a community level, how to understand what it is to be our brother's keeper, to be our sister's keeper, to be our mother's keeper and our father's keeper. And so we are trying to do that psychologically after they've committed after they've committed a crime or after they've gotten into trouble. But from the WhatsApp videos we are seeing and from the TikTok, all that we are seeing is a society where I am the principal person. And if I do not get what I need, then something is not wrong with me, but something is wrong with you or the society because I did not get what I need. That is a far cry from 40 years ago, where the entire village came together to say to you, we are a community, and what you do is going to affect us. Also be careful with what you do. That type of interaction, we perhaps need to see how we could get that back. And yes, the church has been trying to do that. Yes, the church has, with its limited resources, has been pushing for that to continue. But the church is not the only organization that needs to be spreading that message. We need to be spreading that message across the island. Perhaps I can go further and saying across the world. So that particular message, I think, has to be loud and clear that yes, while we want you to be successful, it is not success at any cost. It's not success at trampling onto somebody. It is not getting the latest because it's nice, and that means stealing or doing something to somebody. But it's being able to take into consideration that your actions at the age of 5, at the age of 6, at the age of 7 years old, at the age of 10, your actions are going to affect an individual, a family, a community, and we need to address it from that stage. So I just wanted to put that into the domain, because one of the things I've noticed from even the developed world is everybody believes that they have a right to do everything that they need to do. And when that happens, what happens to the concept of community? And we need to address that. I think as a church, we're still addressing it, but I think there needs to be a wider buy-in to it to ensure that from the youngest to the oldest, we go back to the important concept of community.
Thank you so much. And I also had Mark on my radar because I know when we came to this, no better person would be able to speak about this than Mark. You're talking for those who have just joined us, a couple of people have just joined us. You're talking about Mark Headley, a former inmate, now reformed. And Mark, I want you to come to the table now and just tell us the process from your, by the end of your sentence and how you was able to kind of reintegrate and how you were helped into where you are now today.
Well, first, let me start by saying that, like I said, when this discussion first started a couple of weeks ago, each person has a right to make a choice. The choice is yours. You must be accountable for your actions and you must be held accountable for your actions, right? And in saying that, no amount of jail time can change a person because there are some people that get years in jail and are still going back before he left. There's a guy that got 30 somebody years and he was back up there sometime before he even departed. So that was just by the way that something I saw posted on the screen. So the change must come from within you. You must know how you feel about a situation. You must know how you choose to handle your situation. And for me, the change came or is gradually working itself out because, like I said, at the end of the day, when you're faced with a situation such as I was, you must decide in your mind if you want to continue living a life where you got this thing over your head, you go back down the same road again, you cause people to look at you in the same light, even though some will still look at you in the light they were looking at you in, because mind you, there are some people, even in the church, I must say, that, so this topic that Mr. Dawson broached is a very good topic because some may say the church is an institution or organization that is supposed to help. But part of the problem that you have today is that the church, not all, some churches are not even sure where they're at. They don't have the know-how to help. So sometimes you find or you hear individuals speaking about certain encounters they had with the church. For me personally, that was not the case, like I said from before, because I grew up in the church. So I'm not going to that ministry right now. And my experience with that was in prison, you are offered prison fellowship ministry, which is churches who used to come in before COVID every Saturday or Sunday, depending on your denomination. That works well in prison because at least it offers you something where there's nothing at all. So you will find that most persons that you would expect wouldn't like to be in that sort of setting. They see that as an opportunity to really free up themselves. For me, it came in handy because coming from that sort of background, then realizing that there was something that I could also associate with in prison. And then you had officers, some officers that were Christians, like a good friend of mine, Mr. Johnson. So those are things that you look forward to, and those are things that help you during that time. In society now that I'm home, yes, I go to church, and the church has really been helpful to me. Mr. Neil Dowling, he's a very good source of inspiration. Then you have a guy named Marlon Charles and Apostle Lucille Baird. All of these are persons that are willing to assist and that have been assisting. So the church must play its role, and a serious role, I should say. It can't be a half-hearted role. It can't be a met sport role. You will find other religions are very serious about their stuff. But then when it comes to other religions, then there's always this half-heartedness that causes other problems. So the church has a role to play. It has been very helpful to me so far. And I believe there are others that are looking up to the same churches to step up and help. And in closing, a person also said it is not only church, it has to start from the home. Because if you grow up in a home where there's no church involved, then obviously prison or no prison, you will have no interest in church. So it all starts from home, and it also has to do with the community and how the community sees you when you leave jail, because there will always be that stigma. For example, final point, when this discussion first started a couple weeks ago, my introduction was former ex-convict, now rehabilitated inmate Mark Headley. So that was just to say, people will always see you as an ex-convict. So if you wear a shirt and a tie, you're an ex-convict. If you go to church at the biggest church, you went to prison. If you work in a supermarket, you're an old jail dog. Those are all sort of stigmas and labels that come with you once you pass through jail. And those are some of the things that causes persons then to go back down the same road they walked before. There are 4 guys that were speaking last week that were working in the cleanup program. And 2 of them said to me that when their supervisor heard from some person that they passed through jail, certain things started happening, and then they were blamed for it. So these are things that you're faced with. But yes, the church has a very vital role to play. And I believe that if the church is serious about their role, they need to stop being so quiet as there are in recent times about so many other situations and step to the plate, or else, like Mr. Dawson said, things are going to get way worse in Barbados.
Thank you so much, Mark. Well said. So we coming to the end. We have 10 more minutes to go.
Remarks.
So I would ask now each panelist to summarize and what they take away from this and provide a few solutions to the issues that we discussed. Each person has about 3 minutes.
Okay, I'll go first.
We'll start with you.
Right. My closing remarks. I had an old saying in prison. I came along during the years in prison. I learned. They say, here it is. In prison, everything's here it is. Outside is where it is. Using an old song, tie a yellow ribbon around all old tree, sung by the dawn in 1973. And Mr. Head, what you said, we tell you, here it is in prison. We give you food, shelter, programs, everything. But when you go outside in society, there's no yellow ribbon tie around all old tree. Make you accept you back in your community. As the community suffer from being altruistic to being egoistic to being capitalistic. Therefore, then, we may build a good police system, a good criminal justice system, a good victim impact system. All that is needed. But where is the reintegrated system? Where is the system so that accept that tell the yellow ribbons? We started a yellow ribbon program in prison about 10 years ago. Hardly people show up. Yellow ribbon program in Singapore is a good one to model, in which that there's tax rebates for those businesses who hire ex-prisoners. There's also a corporate social responsibility for businesses to invest in culture capital. All of our Barbadians, as a new foreign republic, are part of our charter, is to set all back in society with open arms. But unfortunately, the prison arms are open. We're there to rehabilitate. We're there to accept you. Here it is outside. And I keep saying it. There's no yellow ribbon tie around all out tree. And where it is, you need to rehabilitation plan. You need to be halfway houses. You need to be continue counseling after the prison counseling. There needs to be continued counseling for drug inmate. Need to be counseling. And for inmate to rehabilitate, as Headley certainly said, we try to put program where change his mindset, his stage of change from one of being, I don't want to change, contemplation, to one of being victorious. At the cope, any factors that come with him. Pressure can always come, as Headley will know, we must change. Therefore, let us all tie a yellow ribbon around the whole oak tree and accept those who are coming back into society and to be part of us. I thank you.
Thank you so much. And Chief Magistrate Weeks, do you have a yellow ribbon for us?
I don't know about the yellow ribbon, but I'm going to jump straight into solutions or continue my whole concept of solutions. These problems that we have, they start in the family. I was speaking to a gentleman who heads one of the men's organizations, and I said to him, and he laughed, we need to teach men common sense. So he laughed. But if your grandmother was talking to you, that's what she will say to you. If we don't structure our families in the correct way, we will always have these problems. A lot of the issues we're having, and Kim alluded to it when she spoke about the mother, that mother probably watches a lot of Black entertainment television, where our women are portrayed as ghetto women who have no class. And they are always willing to look for a fight and pull off their hair and throw their shoes. If we can continue to teach our women to stop living under the Hollywood tree, as Webb said, we will make a lot of progress. And the men must understand this is no longer 1950. The women can do what they want to do. They can achieve what they want to do. They can go to the same schools and same universities, everything. We have to stop this nonsense about thinking that we can buy their affection. All of these are the wrong reasons, and the church does not teach these things. Let me rephrase that. I don't think I may have come across correctly. The church teaches you these things, but I think the church must continue to teach in an era such as ours, where you have all the social media, you must have the balance. And the church must continue to shout in the name of God. The church is always afraid. During crop over, the church wants to criticize lewd behavior, and we're afraid of the fallout. You can't be afraid of the fallout. You have to be bold and shout in the name of God. When I go and talk to young people, I say I am a God man. That means I'm going to talk to them about all the music that they like, speaking about Jah, and I'm going to break it down for them. Why are you listening to this Jah music? Are you not talking about a source? So I am talking about a source. And all of these foundation principles is what we need to get back. Pay less attention watching North American and First World TV and First World social media. Pay less attention. If a lot of our people spend more time joining civic organizations, and remember I mentioned last time about the mandatory parenting programs, because we have people who are getting together for physical reasons. They do not want children. Children come. So they don't have to be taught what is appropriate social behavior to deal with them. So the family is where it starts, the church reinforces it, the school reinforces it, and the community, as the Reverend said. But those persons in the communities must learn to accept that there are successful individuals. You can't go to jokers. I always say, and this is an example people will understand, you cannot be a cricketer in your neighborhood with all the potential in the world to play for the West Indies, and you're going to take advice from your cousin who never played cricket for anybody. You need to find successful individuals who will mentor and guide you. And that's it for now.
Thank you so much. Inspector Dawson?
Yes, sir. Thank you for bringing me after the magistrate all the time. I'm sure we're working together. It would take me a long time to say, but I will say this. Parenting, absolutely necessary that parenting starts at home and it starts properly. parents have to be accountable and also make their children accountable. In relation to the community, we have to build communities who will take the inmate when he comes out, because we talk it, but we are not really doing it. We need to have it where we have either somewhere where they can not only go so they don't go back into the same problem as was said by Ms. Ramsay, but somewhere that they can go, right? And somewhere proper too. We got enough money, okay? So the communities themselves have to accept these persons back and have some forgiveness in the heart. I just want to finish by saying, and I know that Ms. Ramsay will understand this better than most, cut out the retribution, move towards restoration. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Short and sweet. Mark, before we get to Kim, could you kind of summarize for us all that you've gathered and all that you can teach us as a result of one who walked the walk?
In closing, back in 2011, at District D Magistrate's Court, Mr. Weeks, who is now the Chief Magistrate, I witnessed him perform an act that I found to be very amazing. There was a guy that turned up for court on a charge that I will not mention, and Mr. Weeks asked him if he had qualifications, and the guy said yes, he did. And Mr. Weeks asked him, so what you doing this stupidness? And the guy gave his explanation. Mr. Weeks asked the court for an excuse, and he went into the back. I assume he went on the phone, because he came out and he told the guy, don't wear the pants of that style tomorrow, but turn up at the bank at the bottom of University Drive and report to X person. I mention that because now here's a situation where a magistrate who had the power to lawsuit a man in jail, for lack of a better term, for what he was carrying, saw it as an opportunity to show this young man that there is another way to do things. However, we are in a society where people don't understand up to now that because you go to jail, and this could be very controversial, because people go to jail, it does not mean they're guilty of a crime. It could mean a lot of other things. But yet, when you come out, or when persons come out, you are faced then, or they are faced with a whole different ball game, so to speak. So if we are looking to assist, and if we are looking to help, we must remember that there are a lot of youngsters in prison who are lost, who don't even know what tomorrow may bring, who just need a little guidance, who are willing to probably take the next step, but don't have that sort of information to help them. There are lots of persons who are hurting, like Ms. Ramsay said, because they believe they were treated unjustly, because they didn't even know that the case is over, or that the case was called, or that the person is out. So if we are looking to change or to make a better society on a whole for the victim, the criminal, for lack of a better term, and society on a whole, then we must all work together, realizing that it's not about myself, it's not about you, but it's about Barbados and what we are trying to create, or what we are trying to continue. And the church, that every person is saying, must realize that everything falls on the church. It began with the church, and it more than likely can end with the church. So the church should not be silent as it is now. The church should be playing its role as it is ordained to. And I believe that if the church takes up its position and go out, if the families aren't doing their job, well, the churches then should go to the families and point them in the right direction, because all it takes sometimes is for a little guidance. So I believe that there's a lot that we need to do, but it is not impossible, and it can work as long as we are all working together. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate that, Mark. And Kim, can you close us, please, with your final remarks?
Okay, I'm gonna try to make it as succinct as possible. I agree with most of what everybody has said. I have worked at Glenderry Prison 19 years ago, 18, 19 years ago, and I've seen some of the worst, some of the best, some of the in between. I always tell people I've been on both sides, literally. And I know when I have a soft spot for victims, I do understand that a lot of inmates have come up in situations and in circumstances that the average that we generally have not come up in. There are inmates that I have interviewed and spoken to who's witnessed their mother killed by their father, literally in front of them. And that is why I talked about the whole issue of trauma and how trauma can impact on people's lives. I remember interviewing an inmate who was very afraid of, let me say that right now, I was extremely afraid of him because of this crime he committed. And to me, he seemed to be, a bit unstable. But then when he told me that he was raped when he was a child, by a family member, it kind of put things into context. And I always tell people this. I tell people, we sit down and read the newspapers and we cast our aspersions on people and but we do not know these people's backstories. It is not an excuse. But I'm saying all that to say, back to the point I'm making about the kind of conditions. Some people come up with conditions and the lifestyles and backgrounds that will shock many of us. And because we were not able to steer them away from that life, they end up sometimes in the situations they do. Some people are just downright disgusting and follow the multitude to do evil. In my book, Barbados Most Wanted, I spoke about some of Barbados' most notorious criminals, but then when you read their backstories, you remember how Mark Young was raised, how he had to be eaten, hiding up under the cellar of his house. David Oliver, who's still in prison right now, and how he was raised as well. Winston Hall. I mean, some of these people have very rough lives, and I believe that it comes back to the situation of the family, society, the primary agents of socialization, and that's why I was glad, man. The discussion about working with at-risk families, because if we steer some of them in the early, then we could stop the slide from occurring if we just work with some of the at-risk families. So that's that side. On the other side, we have to do work in the communities as well. Some of these communities some of these communities need work. That's all I would say. They need work. They need empowering. They need cleaning up. They need some of our community lead officers probably need to go into communities, work with the people in the communities, work with the children. And I believe that some of these, if some of these things were to occur simultaneously, we would make a lot of progress. And then I come back to the victims as my closing point. We cannot forget the victims. We cannot forget the victims. I've spoken about this throughout the night. I'm not going to repeat myself. But all I'm saying is, if we can do all of these things, work with at-risk families, put programs in communities, children who have gone through trauma in their lives, and there are many of them, they're children that we know of, because we read the crime stories and we know about the children who witnessed murders, whose fathers were killed in front of them. What are we doing for those children to steer them from being in my statistics? We have a lot of work to do. We need the resources. I believe that we need more people to get involved in volunteerism. I know the prison has been speaking about, they want people to come on board. I know the challenges that the police face. Mr. Dawson, some of my best friends are police officers. I know the challenges. But I still believe that we can do more. We can do more as a community. I believe we have to go back to that village. It takes a village to raise a child. And I think that a lot of our problems can be solved if we just take the basic approach to humanity. which is to love each other, care about each other, and look out for each other, instead of, you know, the constant going at each other. If we do those simple things, I believe that we'll make a lot of leeway.
Thank you so much, Kim. And you just hit the nail on the head. It's a simple four-letter word that we probably think is too simplistic. I think when you talk about solutions, people like complex things and they don't like simple things are the real solution. That word love, wrapped up in that word love is care. And when you care, you want to see good for the other person. So if we apply those simple principles as espoused by Jesus Christ, then I'm not saying that we'll be living in a utopia, but things will be much better on the face of this earth. Simple.
Can I just say one quick thing? And then I'm done. When you talk to a lot of men in prison, right? The one common thing they will tell you is they had nobody to show them love or care for them. You know, they come up with people telling them they're no good, they're not this, and the constant, you know the saying about a dog, where you keep hitting at a dog and wounding the dog, what happens to the dog? But if you embrace the dog, show the dog love, whatever, it becomes, you know, it's a different animal. And people believe that it is they don't want it. When I tell people that these simple things like showing somebody love, showing them care, those of you who study psychology will remember Bowlby's theory on attachment and the monkey. I mean, if you do those simple things and just, if we showed a lot of people love and not hate, animosity, I believe that simple thing will solve a lot of world problems, not just crime, world problems. That's my tip.
Yeah, it's true. It changes behavior. You know, it changes behavior. So I want to say thank you very much, Chief Magistrate Weeks, Mark, Inspector Dawson, Kim, and did I miss anybody? No? Right. And every single very important person that joined us tonight. I want to say a special thanks to Pamela, who is joining us from the UK. Is like she says, it's 1 o'clock now in the UK. I want to thank you so much for joining us. I think we really appreciate your presence and your contribution. And anyone else who I have not been able to identify that is joining us from overseas as well and from the region as well, we want to thank you so much. We need more of these fora because, as I said earlier, we need to be educated, because if we keep getting that word out there and we keep touching the right points and pressing the right buttons, I think that we can have a change of behavior. And I want to summarize by saying that the Capefield Wesleyan Holiness Church men's ministry have been doing the same thing that we talked about, that community outreach. We've gone on the block. We have a block ministry. We've also had a mentoring program in 2 primary schools, which targeted the 10 and the 10 plus boys. So we've been doing some work with respect to that outreach aspect, and we intend to continue. But COVID, you know what COVID has done is kind of put some restrictions on the gatherings and face-to-face stuff. So, but I really appreciate everyone who gathered here tonight, and I wish you have a fantastic week ahead and enjoy the rest of the night. I want to end in prayer, and we ask our friend Peter Dawson to do that for us. You did that last time, so it's double the blessing.
That's okay. And dear Heavenly Father, we pray, dear Lord, that you will continue to bless Barbados, dear Lord, even as we grapple with the many issues that we have in society, dear Lord. We know that if we, dear Lord, just look towards you, dear Lord, will send the solution our way. And this is where I ask tonight, dear Lord, that you get us to our homes in peace and safety. Bless all the persons that were on the panel and all the persons that listen. Bless all of those who may be in prison even at this time, to let them know, dear Lord, that there is a light shining. There is a light shining, and that you will shine the light on them. This I pray in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you all, and have a great night.